Yo, reading books to be a hassle, so we made a show. Gotta ace those finals, you know you gotta go. Plug in the headphones and let the knowledge flow. Cramcast on the go, it's the way to grow.
Ready for a deep dive? We're talking muscles today.
Always ready to flex my mental muscles, especially with the excerpts you sent over from Fundamentals of Anatomy and Physiology. Chapter 10, Muscles.
It's way more than just flexing for the mirror, right?
Absolutely, though there's nothing wrong with a little vanity, of course.
This chapter really highlights how crucial muscles are for, well, everything.
Posture, for one, that good posture everyone's always talking about. It's not just about appearances.
Our source material emphasizes the long-term health benefits. Who knew those little shivers on a cold day were partly your muscles trying to keep you warm?
It's true. They're like internal furnaces, these muscles of ours, constantly working behind the scenes.
And speaking of working, did you know there are actually 3 different types of muscle tissue?
Right. It's not a one-size-fits-all situation down there. We've got skeletal, cardiac, and smooth, each with its own unique structure and, importantly, function.
So location is key.
Location is part of it, absolutely. But it's more about what they do. Take skeletal muscle. Probably what pops into your head when you think muscle. Makes sense. It's the one we can control. Biceps, triceps, quads, all the things we work on at the gym.
Exactly. Attached to our bones, helping us move. They're like the strings of a puppet, these muscles.
So what about smooth muscle then? That's got to be the stuff we don't have to think about, right?
Yeah, you got it. Smooth muscle is all about those involuntary movements. Think digestion. Thank goodness we don't have to consciously contract our intestines with every bite.
Right. Talk about a full-time job.
Yeah.
So smooth muscle keeps things moving internally. What about cardiac muscle? That one's all about the heart, I'm guessing.
You know it. And what a muscle it is. Non-stop rhythmic contractions to keep the blood pumping. It's what keeps us ticking, quite literally.
And fundamentals doesn't just stop at the different types. It zooms in,
Yeah.
like way in.
Oh yeah, it gets microscopic.
Right.
We're talking about the level of individual muscle fibers here. Those long cylindrical cells bundled together inside each muscle, like tiny little cables all woven together. Amazing to think something so small can generate so much power.
It really is. And get this, each fiber is made up of even smaller strands called myofibrils. And if we go down another level,
There's more.
oh yeah, we find the sarcomere, the basic unit of contraction. Think of it like the engine of movement.
The sarcomere. Gotta remember that one. So how do these microscopic powerhouses actually work?
That's where the sliding filament theory comes in. The Fundamentals book does a great job explaining it. Basically, you've got these overlapping filaments, thick and thin. They slide past each other during contraction, like a perfectly synchronized microscopic dance.
Okay, so picture this. We're in a sarcomere, right? What are these filaments actually made of?
We're talking proteins here. Myosin for the thick filaments, actin for the thin ones. Now, when the muscle gets the signal to contract...
Hold on, I have so many questions. Like, how does the muscle even get that signal?
Good point. We're jumping ahead a bit. Before those filaments can do their thing, there has to be a message from the nervous system.
The brain calling the shots. But how does that message actually reach the muscles? Is there like a tiny phone line I don't know about?
Think of it more like a relay race.
Yeah.
And the handover point, that's the neuromuscular junction, or NMJ for short. It's where a motor neuron, which is a type of nerve cell, meets up with a muscle fiber.
Okay, so the brain sends a signal, it races down the spinal cord, then along a motor neuron. What happens when that signal reaches the NMJ, the finish line?
That's where things get really electrifying, even more so than usual in our bodies. When that nerve impulse reaches the end of the motor neuron, it's like a signal flare goes up.
Okay, traumatic, but I like it. What's the flare?
A special chemical messenger called a neurotransmitter. In this case, it's acetylcholine, or ACH.
Acetylcholine? Sounds familiar. Isn't that involved in other things too?
Oh yeah, AC is a busy molecule. It's all over the nervous system. But for muscle contraction, it's all about that communication between nerve and muscle.
So the AT crosses the gap, right? Between the neuron and the muscle fiber.
Exactly. There's a tiny gap there called a synaptic cleft. The ACT fuses across that cleft and binds to receptors on the muscle fiber's membrane.
Like a lock and key. So what happens next? Does this binding magically make the muscle contract?
Not quite magic, but pretty close. This is where things get interesting. The Fundamentals book goes into detail here. Remember those T-tubules we talked about earlier?
Those tunnels that run through the muscle fiber?
Those are key players in this whole process. The binding of ACA triggers an electrical signal that travels along the muscle fiber's membrane. And guess where it goes?
Down into those T-tubules, like an internal messaging system.
You got it. That electrical signal is the messenger, and it's headed straight for the sarcoplasmic reticulum. That's where the muscle stores its calcium.
Calcium, so it's not just for strong bones. Muscles need calcium too. Who knew?
Calcium is essential for a muscle contraction. Think of it like the key that unlocks the whole process. The electrical signal reaches the sarcoplasmic reticulum.
Which holds the calcium.
Exactly. And it's like hitting a release button. The sarcoplasmic reticulum releases its calcium ions into the muscle fiber.
Okay, so calcium is flowing freely now. What's it going to do?
It's going to bind to a protein called troponin. Troponin is attached to those thin filaments we talked about, the actin filaments.
Okay, it's starting to all come together now. So calcium binds to troponin, and then what?
Well, troponin is connected to another protein called tropomyosin, which is blocking the myosin binding sites on the actin.
So the myosin can't grab onto the actin because tropomyosin is in the way.
Exactly. But when calcium binds to troponin, it causes a shift in tropomyosin, moving it out of the way.
And now the myosin has access to the actin. It's like clearing the dance floor for the main event.
Perfect analogy. With tropomyosin out of the picture, the myosin heads can finally attach to the actin filaments.
Leading to that sliding filament action we talked about. That's how the muscle contracts.
Amazing.
Amazing and energy intensive. Remember, all this action requires fuel. Right, even those tiny molecular dancers need their energy drinks. So how do muscles power those contractions?
The answer, like with many things in biology, is ATP, adenosine triphosphate. It's the cellular energy currency that fuels those myosin heads, allowing them to perform the power stroke of the contraction cycle.
So muscles must have a stash of ATP on hand, right? Like a little energy reserve.
They do. Muscles store a small amount of ATP and another high-energy molecule called creatine phosphate, or CP. That CP can quickly regenerate ATP from ADP, which is what's left over after ATP is used for energy.
So it's like a backup generator, that CP, kicking in when the main power source runs low. But surely that can't last forever.
You're right. Those immediate energy stores are used up quickly, especially during intense exercise. That's where our metabolic pathways come in. You've probably heard of aerobic and anaerobic exercise. Well, those terms also apply to how our bodies produce ATP for energy.
Aerobic, anaerobic. I'm vaguely familiar with those terms from gym class, but remind me again, what's the difference?
Think of aerobic metabolism as the long-distance runner. It's efficient, using oxygen to generate ATP, but it takes a bit longer to kick in. It's how our bodies primarily produce energy at rest and during moderate, sustained activity.
Okay, so if aerobic is the marathon runner, then anaerobic must be the sprinter.
Exactly. Anaerobic metabolism doesn't need oxygen, so it kicks in much faster when we need quick bursts of energy, like for sprinting or weightlifting.
Makes sense, but there's got to be a trade-off, right?
There is. While anaerobic metabolism is great for quick energy, it's less efficient than aerobic metabolism and produces lactic acid as a byproduct.
Ah, lactic acid. So that's why my muscles feel like they're burning during a tough workout.
Precisely. Lactic acid buildup is a sign that your muscles are relying more on anaerobic metabolism to keep up with the energy demands. And that brings us to another interesting concept from fundamentals. Oxygen debt, also known as EPO.
EPO, huh?
Yeah.
Sounds intense.
It's basically your body's way of playing catch-up after an intense workout. See, even after you stop exercising, your body needs extra oxygen to restore those energy stores, convert that lactic acid back to glucose, and get everything back to its normal balanced state.
So it's like our muscles are running a tab during intense exercise, and EPOC is our body settling the bill afterward. Makes sense. Okay, we've covered how muscles get their energy, but what about how they actually use that energy to create different types of movement? I mean, it's not all just about flexing, right?
You're right. There's more to muscle contractions than meets the eye. Fundamentals dives into two main types, isotonic and isometric.
Exactly. Isotonic contractions are all about movement. The muscle changes length under a pretty constant load.
So like lifting weights.
Perfect example. Imagine doing bicep curls. As you lift the weight, your bicep muscle shortens. That's a concentric contraction.
Okay, makes sense.
Then as you lower the weight, nice and controlled, the bicep lengthens. That's an eccentric contraction. So isotonic is all about shortening or lengthening while the muscle works. What about isometric then? That sounds a lot more static.
You're on the right track. Isometric contractions are where the muscle develops tension but doesn't actually change length.
Now, how's that even possible?
Think about trying to push a wall. You're putting in effort, your muscles are definitely working, but the wall's not moving.
Okay, I get it. So your muscles are contracting, but there's no movement. Isometric.
Exactly. Holding a plank is another classic example of isometric work. All those core muscles engaged, but no movement.
I can feel the burn just thinking about it. So isotonic equals movement, isometric equals holding steady. Got it.
Good.
But those are just the basics, right? I bet fundamentals goes deeper.
It wouldn't be a deep dive without it, right? The book talks about how our muscles are incredibly adaptable, especially when it comes to things like force and endurance.
Okay, so how does that work? We've got those different types of muscle fibers, right? Fast, slow.
You got it. And those fiber types play a big role in muscle performance. Fast fibers are like the sports cars of the muscle world. Quick, powerful, but they run out of gas fast.
So all those sprinters out there, they've got fast fibers to thank for their speed. What about endurance athletes then? Marathons, that kind of thing.
That's where slow fibers shine. They're more like the reliable, fuel-efficient cars. They contract slowly, don't generate as much force, but they can keep going and going.
And most of us are somewhere in between with those intermediate fibers, right? A mix of speed and stamina.
Exactly. And the proportions of those fiber types, they vary depending on the muscle's job and even our genes.
Fascinating. This deep dive is totally changing how I think about my workouts. But before we wrap up, we can't forget about cardiac and smooth muscle, those other muscle superstars working hard in the background.
Absolutely. And while they share that basic contraction machinery with skeletal muscle, they've got their own unique features that make them perfect for their jobs.
Well, lay it on me. What makes them so special?
Let's start with cardiac muscle. Like skeletal muscle, it's striated, meaning it's got that striped appearance under a microscope.
Because of those organized sarcomeres we talked about earlier.
Exactly. But cardiac muscle cells, they're much smaller, they branch out, and they're interconnected in a way that allows them to work together as a team.
Makes sense. The heart needs to be one big synchronized unit to keep that blood flowing. Fundamentals mentions something called intercalated discs. What are those?
Those are specialized junctions between those cardiac muscle cells. Think of them like tiny communication highways, allowing electrical signals to travel rapidly from one cell to the next.
So that's how the whole heart contracts in sync. And wasn't there something special about cardiac muscle and the nervous system?
Oh yeah, cardiac muscle can generate its own electrical impulses. That's what we call automaticity. The nervous system can still influence things like heart rate, but this inherent rhythmicity. It keeps the heart beating, even if there's some nerve damage.
That is amazing. Talk about a dedicated worker. Okay, so what about smooth muscle? It seems like the unsung hero, quietly working in so many different parts of the body.
Smooth muscle is all about endurance and versatility. Unlike skeletal and cardiac muscle, it's not striated. No neatly arranged sarcomeres.
Really? How does it even contract then?
It's thick and thin filaments. They're arranged more randomly, kind of crisscrossed, and that actually allows it to contract slowly and steadily over a wider range of lengths.
So it's built for those long-haul contractions, like in the digestive system.
Exactly. And while it doesn't have troponin like skeletal muscle, it uses a different protein called calmodulin to bind calcium and initiate contraction.
Calcium, always there at the heart of muscle function. This has been incredible. Fundamentals of Anatomy and Physiology is full of so much amazing information. I'm going to look at my muscles in a whole new light.
Me too. It's incredible when you think about the microscopic processes happening every time we move, even just a little bit.
It really is. And for our listeners, think about this. We've talked about individual muscles, but imagine all those muscles, all those sarcomeres, working together in perfect harmony to create every single movement.
From a graceful dance move to a powerful athletic feat, it's mind-blowing.
Absolutely. And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive into the world of muscles. Until next time, keep those muscles moving and those brains engaged.
College Cramcast, we're relieving the stress. Turn